Welcome to the Emamo Show, where we have honest chats with event producers to uncover lessons about bringing people together. I'm your host, Taylor McKnight, and I'm really excited about our guest today. Xander Castro is the event producer behind MicroConf, an amazing set of conferences in the US and Europe focused on the startup community. I had the pleasure of recently attending MicroConf Europe in Dubrovnik, Croatia last month, and the experience was outstanding. Hey Xander, great to have you on our show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Super excited
Absolutely.
to be on.
Awesome. Cool. So let's get started. Describe MicroConf to somebody who's never attended.
Yeah, so MicroConf is a conference, a brand of conferences that is specifically geared towards independently funded or self-funded and bootstrapped startup founders. These are folks that are looking to take projects that they've been working on or side hustles that they've been really grinding away at, but haven't been able to focus on full time, just given the reality of needing a day job or doing things that they're particularly excited about with their free time, as opposed to the things that they are doing on their 9 to 5.
Yep.
The majority of our attendees are independent business owners that have put together products that range really across the gamut in most functions of SaaS. So we have a lot of B2B companies, there's a handful of B2C companies that come through, apps, web platforms, database tools, dual-sided marketplaces, things to that effect. Essentially anything that you can create online and digitally and turn into a business, that is our core audience.
That was a great description. So what is the goal of MicroConf? Like, how do you know if it was successful?
Yeah, so the primary goal of the event is to really establish a strong sense of community, establish a strong connection between other founders of different types of businesses. So what we keep an eye on is the feedback that we get through our surveying tools, and really just the mutual engagement that we see through some of our channels, like the Slack channel that we produce to keep our attendees connected, the really visual experience of seeing individual connections and solutions being created during our events, during the networking opportunities of the conference. The top piece of feedback that we receive is that the networking and social opportunities, which we've called our hallway track for the conference for years now, is one of the most valuable opportunities that our attendees get during the event. And really that is about finding mutual people in the same frame of mind, working on similar problems, projects, tasks, and being able to create solutions collaboratively. So we'll constantly see people leave the event and say that within 1 week, a piece of advice or a recommendation has turned into an upswing in business productivity or sales, or honestly, one of the mantras of the event coming from Patio 11 is to charge more. And so the number of times that we will see people leave the event, leave the conference, and specifically say, hey, I'm increasing my prices by adding a 0 to the end of it exclusively because of this piece of feedback, and the number of times that we've seen we've gotten then the follow-up that alone has increased their reach to customers, really is indicative of the type of education and the type of recommendations that our speakers and other attendees are willing to make to the folks that are seeking out that type of information. It's actionable, it's things that you can do within really a couple of days of leaving the conference, and you will see some results on the backside of how it relates to your business operations and sales.
Yeah, I love the focus on real world impact. And it's kind of funny, like I spend all my time building and selling software, but finding other software and online business creators has been challenging. And so it's amazing that you guys bring everybody together, to share that kind of real world impactful advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that we do split our conference, especially in the US, into 2 tracks. We have 2 back-to-back conferences that run on a growth track and on a starter track. So my description of who attends the events really does encompass the entire pool of audience members that we do have coming through. But specifically with our growth audience, these are people that have really taken to the business of it being on the internet and the internet space and creating digital products. And they are highly likely to be moved into a full-time employment space. So not only are you seeing some of those general problems around ideation and creating concepts and how to find your product market fit, within whatever space that you are in as a starter. But once you've decided to leave your day job and you are just focusing on the product that you have put together, there's a huge swath of attendees that fit into that bucket as well. And so it's interesting to see the progression of attendees who have been coming for the last 8 years and see where their businesses have gone from day one through today. We are heading into our 20th conference in April with MicroConf Growth Edition, and some of the people that are attending have been there 15, 16 times. So it's really interesting to see what that progression looks like and what connections they can individually point to say, hey, this is something that really gave me the gumption to make a move with this business that I didn't necessarily know I had, or an option that I didn't know existed, but because of a connection I made at MicroConf, I was able to make this change, and it really has made an impact to the business.
Right. I think it's especially interesting, like, you know, one immediate thing that I think other event kind of producers can learn is the way that you all have segmented your audience into kind of two conferences, right? Do some people attend both of them? And how did that kind of come about, breaking it into two different focused events?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we've always wanted to do is to make sure that the quality of the audience and the quality of the connections that can be made are really high. We were selling out our flagship conference, which was just MicroConf at the time, within minutes of the event going on sale. And that clearly indicated that there was a significant need that was being met with the conference. But it also kind of indicated that, based on what we were seeing attendee-wise, where we took data against what their registrations were about, their status of business, the type of business that they're engaged in,
right,
what their revenue levels are, what their employment numbers were looking like. And what we were seeing was that there was a pretty clear disparity between essentially two camps, right. A group that was closer to that starter level, that was really just playing around with an idea or making a couple of dollars a month off of an idea, versus a pool of people who were looking for education that was to the next level, that was clear that they were thirsty for something that wouldn't be able to be achieved if we were trying to split the hairs between that starter audience and the growth audience. So the natural evolution was, hey, we're selling out this flagship conference. We know that there's a significant portion of the attendees that are looking for higher level education. Let's take it to two tracks that focus on kind of that starter point, and then find ways to help founders move their business from 6 to 7 to 8 figures of annual revenue. And it was really clear that split needed to be kind of honed in on, in order to provide the best possible education for our attendees.
It's so clever. And I think it just shows that the producers behind the scenes kind of paid attention to that data, right? And like knew how to break those apart into two really focused areas to better serve both groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we are unique in that our audience is less about the audience and more about the founders of the conference, Rob Walling and Mike Tabor. They are so steeped within the space and within the startup industry, and
they really live
been exactly. They've been such strong thought leaders in this world, and what that results in is having that level of touch from the founders of an event, and for them to really represent some of the strongest thought leadership in the industry. They were so close to the expectations of the attendees and understood the conversations that they were having with attendees in a way that really helped us channel the content of the conferences, and really clearly gave us the information on top of the data we were capturing to say, yeah, we know that there is this dual need that needs to be filled. And by splitting the conference, we not only gave access to 33% more people to attend our events, but we did give them the opportunity then to self-select what type of content they feel they're going to need in their business. And we crafted the content around that concept.
Right.
To one of your questions that I did miss, we do see quite a bit of overlap. I think that one of the things that our attendees are really seeking out the most with our events is that network and the opportunity to connect with other attendees. And so
Right.
even if the education is a potential mismatch or maybe a little bit lower level for someone who's coming from growth into starter edition, the quality of people is still so high. The quality of our attendees is so high that being in a room with like minds and deciding to do that for 5 days as opposed to 3 days is a really interesting decision, and one that we want to make sure our attendees feel comfortable with. We want them to know that the education is going to be quality.
Right.
It's just a matter of whether it is as applicable to you in your current state of business as it possibly can be. It's interesting to see that some folks do believe that the value of attending the conference does transcend just the education that we're providing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the dream, right? To kind of build that kind of year-round community, those lasting
Absolutely.
connections. Let's dig into some of the kind of behind-the-scenes production stuff. Like, how many people are on your event team, and what are your responsibilities?
Yeah, so for the last 8 years, it has been 3 people that have been running our events.
Amazing.
Our co-founders, so Mike and Rob. And then when they originally launched the conference, it was just them. They were not event producers. They had no experience in planning events up until the decision to host a conference in Las Vegas. And so they came to the event with the passion and the energy, but they weren't professional event planners, event producers. So then about 2 years later, they brought me onto the team as a freelance producer. I was working at a venue at the time, and so I was managing a book of 350, 400 events a year.
Wow.
But I also found myself with enough time to be able to produce a conference. So it was actually my first conference that I had ever independently produced as a freelance event producer. And so it was just the 3 of us for about 5 years. And from an event production side of things, operations, logistics, billing, invoicing, all of the logistics operations of the event, that all fell under my umbrella. We had content curation happening through Rob. So he was selecting all of our speakers. He was doing all of the vetting with our speakers. And Mike was responsible for soliciting and selling sponsorship. But from the point of someone agreeing that they were going to sponsor or that they were going to speak, then they came down the pipeline to me, at which point then I started implementing. So we've operated on a very lean team, which has been fascinating and a little terrifying at times, but for the most part, it's been a pleasure because it really has given me a lot of tools on how to produce with limited resources in terms of manpower. It gave me a really good frame on how to leverage tools to be able to make things happen. At this point now, we have additional resources in terms of staffing. So we have one additional person who is kind of focusing on our social media side of things, a little bit more on the graphic design side of the planning and the execution of the event. But when it comes to the logistics execution, back to those operations and ensuring that the event is run as flawlessly as it possibly can, the majority of that responsibility still rests with me.
I think to be a successful event producer, you really need to thrive in that environment of like little resources, right? Like, and like the problem solving and the firefighting. Like, you have to really find kind of pleasure in like what the end outcome is, right? To want to keep doing this year after year.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that I always get sadism versus masochism wrong, and I have a moniker, but it's wrong also. But whichever one is the self-inflicted, I think that is it's a little part about almost every event producer is that we thrive off of the challenges, the roadblocks, the mass of minute details that we're required to execute and think through on
Absolutely.
a daily basis. And for anybody who has never produced an event, or anybody who has a lot of anxiety around perfection, I think that there are definitely some challenges that you run into. Then you have the opposite side of it, where those people who are anxiety ridden and have have a couple of hang-ups, this is an industry that they may thrive in, because it is such an opportunity to focus and to really take ownership over something that is really quite meaningful and really has a high touch and has a lot of risk involved with it. I think events are 90% risk, in that you're putting your reputation on the line and you're hoping that everything goes according to plan. And you plan for as many worst case scenarios as you possibly can, but there is always going to be something that falls out of plan, and an ability to really think that through and recenter yourself around, hey, here is this individual problem. I need to tackle it. I need to get this done. It does take a certain type of person. I think that's the thing that distinguishes event producers from people who are just throwing events. The line is interesting, but there are people who throw events that they're really just gathering people together, and it's less about creating an experience. And I think that's what distinguishes event producers.
Right.
And yeah, exactly.
So I'm especially interested in learning about your communication strategy. I think y'all did a great job using a variety of tools: email, newsletter updates, Slack, the Get Faces directory kind of experiment to get that job done. Like, can you talk me through some of, that whole communication kind of social media strategy for keeping attendees updated?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of historically, we have done actually quite minimal, especially in the sales and the outreach side of things. It has generally been a handful of emails, a couple of social media plugs. But once you get into the actual information dissemination phase, where you want to make sure that attendees have everything they need and are equipped to get to the event, to get to the spaces that you're using, to know what to anticipate, kind of point by point by point. Right. In their on-site experience, you want to be communicative. You want to make sure that everybody feels like they have all of the resources and all of the information that they need. So we generally have an email calendar that outlines when individual updates are going to go out. So whether it be make sure you're booking the hotel rooms, we kind of flag what those major deadlines are, highlight, hey, 1 week out from our room block closing, we should let our attendees know that the room block is about to close. And when you craft those emails, you want to think about what is the most important detail. The room block is closing, the price is going to go up. So here is the price of the room you're going to see after this goes up. You probably will still be able to get a room, but if you want to get a room at a discounted rate that we've negotiated for you, you have 1 week to do that.
Right. So don't bury the lead. You want that one goal to kind of shine through.
Yep, of course. You want to make sure that the most important elements and your top line CTAs or call to actions are the ones that are most prominent in all of those communications. So for example, when we launched our Slack channel, we wanted to remind attendees that the goal is to keep them all connected. So we included a number of different tools that were going to be available for them to connect to other attendees. So we had our Slack channel, we had the Get Faces platform that you had mentioned, which is essentially an aggregated grid of the headshots of our attendees that includes quick profile information and some limited tagging. It was actually developed by an attendee from MicroConf after he saw that it was something that we didn't have in place, and he then started researching it. So awesome. I think that's one of the other amazing things that we have had access to, is that our attendees have had the opportunity to see what is potentially missing or what gaps there are in the event that they are attending, and then they go and start building that thing the next day.
Definitely an advantage for having a software community as your audience. Yeah.
Absolutely. Having a niche software community
Right.
as our audience. I
Right.
mean, these folks are, some of them are so thirsty and excited to find ideas for products that can then move into production with. And it is a unique opportunity for sure.
I especially love the Slack channel. And I think that, I mean, Slack's, public, they're a big deal. They're I don't think a secret in kind of the work community, but
Definitely.
I don't think most events set up a Slack channel for attendees. And so I guess tell me a little bit about like, how did you decide to do that? And like, what was the process like? Like, did you manually invite each person, or how did that work?
Yeah, so our Slack channel has definitely evolved over the last couple of years. We didn't launch it until, I believe, 2015 or 2016.
Okay, still very ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Yeah. So we recognized just such a strong thirst from our attendees to start talking early, to start communicating early. And there are so many routes that you can take with that. You can establish forums, you can direct people into your website and create chat rooms, essentially. You can leverage event apps. I think that that's really what the majority of event producers are doing today when it comes to attendee communication, is that they're leveraging a robust event platform from one of your big three producers of event apps. But what we were leaning into was that sense of workplace community and direct communication that a tool like Slack is optimized for. So when it came to making the decision on what type of tool we wanted to leverage, we just found that so many of our attendees were involved in using Slack on the day-to-day. It was something that was familiar. It was a low barrier to entry for our attendees to get involved and to get into the space.
That's so
We've
key.
tried a couple of different... Yeah, yes. It's really understanding where your attendees are at and meeting them there. Because if we were to launch an event app, the costs associated with that are costs. It's not cheap to put together an event app. And with the size of our audience and the scope of the program that we were hosting, to be able to find a tool that solved some of the issues that we were seeing, whether it be push notifications about schedule changes or things to that effect, those were all things we could find a way to leverage Slack for.
Right. So I think like you kind of touched on like going where your audience is. And so for you, you found out that most of these people were already using Slack. I mean, I know I already use Slack, so it was easy to just add another channel. I think that is big, as somebody who my last company, I used to sell event apps to event organizers. One of the constant challenges that all these event platforms have, right, is that attendees don't want to really bother with downloading the app or getting involved until right before the event, right?
Absolutely.
I think that with the Slack community, it was just amazing that all these people weeks before the event were kind of sharing bios about what they're looking for, who they are, what they're up to. And I found that like really engaging.
Yeah, it's a unique tool in that it is so live as well. Obviously, other forums have that opportunity where it can be super high touch, super interactive, people that are spending a lot of time within those rooms. But I have seen anywhere between 80 to 85% pickup on our Slack channel. And again, I think it's significant in that it's something we know our audience is familiar with, and it's an app that is likely already own. So the barrier to entry, as I mentioned, is pretty low for them to choose to adopt the tool. Engagement and actual use case, when it comes to an individual user, that starts to fall off a little bit, but I don't think I've ever seen quite the adoption rate when I've used an event app for an event as I have with this tool.
Right.
Usually I'm used to seeing 50, 60% on the high end of engagement and download for the apps that we've put out.
You're spot on.
And then, so to see 20 to 30% increase over that just by providing this free tool to create this sense of community. I think that that's something that we hit a sweet spot there.
Yeah, and especially because it's free, right? I think that's a really, amazing benefit. Obviously, every event team is kind of strapped for resources, and better engagement and it's free. It's a crazy kind of win-win.
It's an interesting mix. There are things that we haven't done perfectly with it. There are things that our attendees ask for, and there are changes to the platform in and of itself that have caused us to make adjustments to the way that we have basically fit the square peg into a round hole for the event. But I even as I say that, I don't necessarily know that I believe that that's what the action is. I think it is a tool that really can create a sense of community amongst your attendees that people are used to using. Well, it depends on the industry that you're in, obviously. But when it comes to hosting tech events and events with founders and startups, they're so used to using this form of a tool to communicate directly with either their stakeholders or their employees or other members of other teams that are a part of their company. It just felt like a good fit for what our attendees were using.
Yeah, I'm going to keep digging into Slack because I just think it's a really interesting opportunity that not enough event producers take advantage of. As somebody who's been doing the Slack channel for their audience for events for a while now, like how do you structure the channels? Slack channels are basically different kind of Slack chat rooms, right?
Yeah, so we established 4 primary channels. It's an announcements channel, which is a private channel that only the administrators are able to use. So that is how we use the tool to send out updates about schedule changes, room changes, any unique things that folks may need to know. Or it can be as simple as come to our evening reception thanks to our sponsor who is supporting this event. It really does give us an interesting opportunity to leverage a little bit more sponsor recognition and direct sponsor plugging as well.
You can link directly to them. You can show their photos. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
And like, I think that's also key. Like, I think somebody, a common complaint you hear about Slack, at least when I read about it on Twitter, right, is that there's so many messages it's hard to keep up to. So I think it's so key that y'all have, found out that having an official channel where if they don't want to kind of engage in the conversations and catch up on hundreds of chats, as an attendee, I can always go to one official channel to see like what are the updates and changes from the planners themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenge you're talking about where it's just a deluge of messages and so much content that's being put out and so many questions being asked, that's something that we are really cognizant of as well. And so that's why we only have those 4 total primary channels. We also have a meetup channel for people to connect to go grab dinner, things like that. We have our hallway track, which is our general random conversations, whatever you guys want to talk about, dig into it with this channel, and then a specific introductions channel so that everybody can introduce themselves and let the rest of the attendees know what it is they're looking for, what problems they're facing, or what solutions they potentially have for other people's problems.
I love that. Just so 4 focused channels and like, just that kind of loose structure, but it's enough structure to kind of drive people to do those things in those four areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do create the opportunity for folks to create private channels, which then we have a specific list that is pinned to the top of our announcements channel that includes all of the different private channels that have been created. The reason that we keep them private is because we want to avoid just a huge list of channels that are available to the attendees to join, because that's when it starts getting overwhelming. Yep, absolutely. It starts getting to be a little bit high pressure. You start receiving a lot more notifications when you end up joining 15 to 16 different channels based on specific interests and things like that. So we want our attendees to feel empowered to choose to receive that information, as opposed to basically making it everybody is subjected to everything.
Is that something you learned over time, or how did you kind of realize that?
That was something that was at the forefront of the process, just because the Twitter articles that you're reading, the content that's being put out about Slack, about it being just so potentially overwhelming, was just something that we wanted to curb. We also had been working with an attendee who was running essentially a community-based Slack. So he had 100 to 150 people within the Slack channel, and he had some best recommendations and best practices that we should loop into the way that we were executing. So again, it goes back to having such an engaged and amazing attendee base, providing feedback and recommendations for things that made perfect sense in the context of what we were producing.
And I know that I think you either are closing the channel this Friday or last Friday, was it?
Yeah, we did close the channel down on Friday last week.
So talk me through that. We talked about kind of setting up ahead of the event to create the community and let people introduce themselves and have these chats and all of those kind of networking opportunities. And then why does it make sense to kind of close down that Slack room a couple weeks or a month after your event?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have found is that the usership of the Slack channel goes from your 60, 70, 80% engagement during the event itself to basically zero the day after. A couple of days after, you tend to see a couple of ideas floating around, a couple of thank yous that will go out. We leverage it to do some pushes in terms of additional sponsorship promo, directing people to specific announcements, things. We still are making announcements throughout kind of the tail end of the use of the Slack channel. But when it comes to actual attendee engagement, that completely drops off once the event is completed. So you can see complete descent from a significant level of engagement on the last day of the conference to close to zero the following day.
Assumably they take those connections offline or, to Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever networks they're already on.
Yep. Yeah. So that is what I do believe is what happens, is that the value of the Slack channel in the way that we present it is an opportunity to meet people ahead of the event, get to know them, and then come into the event as a tool to keep people connected, to make announcements around what is happening at the event, to then the follow-up being essentially as a dead channel. I think you would see similar situations with event apps as well.
Absolutely.
Where you're not going to have people engaging with the app itself once the event is over, unless there is a really compelling reason to. And to create compelling reasons and to create moderation around those things, especially when you start getting into the realm of this is probably our 9th or 10th event that we've put together a Slack channel for. That would then be 9 to 10 ongoing channels that are being really mildly leveraged, not really used all that much, but that we then are continuing to moderate and continuing to manage. And so just the workload of that would be overbearing by the time that we would get to today. So to imagine having something long-term in that sense on an event-by-event basis, it doesn't seem like a perfect fit for very specific event communications when you're branding it as an event tool.
And it's interesting because there is a kind of year-round audience that Rob and Mike have built around their community, but they kind of engage in different ways, right? They're active on Twitter, they're podcasting. So there are other ways to participate in the community year-round that aren't the Slack channel. And from an event attendee myself, it was nice that it was kind of that limited window where I could hop in, I could network, I could meet other people, I could have these conversations, and then, follow the people I met on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and then not feel like I'm committing to yet another channel and my Slack sidebar is already out of control, right? It's actually more encouraging knowing that this is kind of a month or 2 month long kind of temporary community around the event itself.
Around the event itself. And that is what I will specifically highlight, is that it is around the event itself.
Right.
That said, we have some really exciting announcements that are coming down the pipeline in the next couple of weeks. Cool. And so some of these recommendations and some of these explanations for the intent and the goal of what some of the tools that we're using, those are going to be changing.
Yeah, that
and
makes sense.
I think at this stage, there is a lot of intention around why that is going to change and what the next version. We're heading into the 20s. It's the 20s, baby, and our 20th conference is happening. It is 2020. I mean, there's just a really strong energy around what is going to be an exciting refresh of what we're doing and how we're producing and presenting events to our attendees. So the goal will be to have MicroConf be a year-round space resource for everybody that is interested in starting a business, that is currently working on a business and is looking to grow it, or that is just really interested and engaged with the startup industry.
It's so needed.
There's a lot of exciting things.
Yeah, that's exciting. Cool. Well, that kind of wraps up my conversation. Let's end with, you mentioned that MicroConf US has like the two flavors. They're both in Minneapolis. It's one after the other. I believe April 19th through 23rd. Is that right?
Yeah. So the 19th through the 23rd. So we have back-to-back conferences. We do have a crossover reception between the two audiences because, like nice. I said, there is that desire to be in the room with like-minded individuals. And so we do create an opportunity for the attendees of both conferences to meet with one another and to start connecting with one another. Thoughtful. April 19th through the 21st is our Growth Edition conference. And then the 21st, which is that crossover day, through the 23rd is the Starter Edition conference.
Wonderful. I'll link that in the show notes. And this has been just super interesting and really helpful for other event planners out there, looking to use some of these tools, especially the Slack kind of engagement that's free is really, really cool. Thank you so much, Xander, for sharing about MicroConf and, explaining kind of some of the behind the scenes details that we don't always get to see as attendees. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time and letting me come on.
Thanks for tuning in this week. And thanks again to Xander for sharing how they maintain and support the MicroConf community. Find links to their event in our show notes and visit us at emamo.com. That's emamo.com. See you next time.